John F. Kennedy did not save the world during the Cold War because he was strong. He saved it because he was dying.
That's a blunt way to start.
It is. It's the blunt, uncomfortable, irreversible truth we have to start with today. The story we've all been told, the myth of the bronzed, athletic, sailing statesman, was a medical illusion.
A performance.
A biohacked performance that nearly failed us completely, but ultimately provided the one thing his healthy, robust generals lacked, a visceral fear of death. We're exploring this idea of the mortality filter through the lens of Robert Dallek's incredible biography, An Unfinished Life, today on Nonfiction Insights.
And it is a jarring premise to start a conversation with because, we're all conditioned to view health as a proxy for competence, especially in the presidency.
Of course.
We want the leader of the free world to be a paragon of vitality. We want to see him jogging up the stairs to Air Force One. But what you're suggesting is that Dallek's work forces us to confront this deep paradox that the physical ruin of JFK's body, the agony, the decay, the simple proximity to the end, created a cognitive framework that somehow prevented a nuclear holocaust.
Exactly. We have to look at what I call the proposition of the avatar. When you really sit down with Dallek's research, when you go through the medical archives that were sealed for decades, you realize that John F. Kennedy, as the public understood him, was, well, fundamentally a manufactured construct.
A biological avatar.
A biological avatar, designed to hide a ruin.
And when you say a ruin, you're not speaking metaphorically.
Not at all. A total physical ruin. And I really think we need to get into the weeds on this because Dallek doesn't spare the details, and neither should we. We can't just gloss over this with the usual historical footnotes about a bad back.
No, it was so much more than that.
The man was falling apart in ways that are, frankly, they're difficult to comprehend for a modern patient, let alone a sitting president during the Cold War. We all know about the back, yes. But Dallek digs into the records and reveals a man with vertebrae so collapsed from osteoporosis that he effectively had the spine of an 80-year-old man.
And he was in his 40s.
In his 40s, the pain was constant. It wasn't something that flared up. It was the baseline reality of his existence.
And that osteoporosis, as Dallek points out, wasn't just bad luck or, genetics. It was very likely exacerbated or maybe even caused by the very drugs he was taking to treat the other massive hidden issue.
Addison's disease.
The Addison's, adrenal failure.
Right, and this is really the engine of the whole misery. His body couldn't produce the hormones needed to manage stress or his own immune response. Biologically, your adrenal glands are these little walnut-sized organs that regulate your fight-or-flight response.
Yeah.
Kennedy's were withered. They were essentially dead.
So when you or I face a stressful situation, our bodies flood with cortisol, with adrenaline. We adapt. His body couldn't do that. A common cold could have killed him. A stressful meeting could have sent him into what's called an adrenal crisis.
A life-threatening state. So to counteract this, he's taking corticosteroids just to stay alive, to replace what his own body can't make. But here's the vicious cycle Dallek uncovers. The side effect of those massive life-saving steroid doses is that they dissolve your bones. They eat you from the inside out.
So it's this cycle of destruction. You take a drug to treat one fatal condition, and that drug creates another debilitating one. You treat one thing, you break another.
Precisely. It's a constant, desperate balancing act. Then on top of that, you add the chronic spastic colitis. He was in constant, agonizing gut pain.
So intense that it would cause him to lose weight rapidly. He would look gaunt, almost skeletal at times if he wasn't being treated for it.
Then you throw in the urinary tract infections, which were so frequent they were almost chronic. He had fevers that would just spike out of nowhere, leaving him completely debilitated for days. This wasn't a man with a few health problems. This was a man whose body was a battlefield.
The mechanics of how he actually navigated the world, that's what really struck me in the text. To project that image of the young, vigorous leader, he had to fundamentally alter how he moved through space. It wasn't just about having good posture for the camera.
No, it was a magic trick. It was a full-time stage performance. Dallek describes how the second he was out of the public eye, the avatar just vanished.
And the real man emerged.
The real broken man. He often couldn't walk without crutches. He literally couldn't bend over to put on his own socks or shoes. He needed a valet, an aide, to do that for him every single morning.
Just think about that for a second. The commander-in-chief, the leader of the free world, can't put on his own socks.
Imagine the vulnerability in that. And the stairs. When he had to go down a flight of stairs, if the cameras weren't rolling, he couldn't walk down normally. He had to descend sideways like a crab, walking one painful step at a time to mitigate the jarring shock to his spine.
That image is just... It's incredibly difficult to reconcile with the public footage we all have in our heads.
Of course it is.
We see the touch football games on the lawn at Hyannisport. We see him sailing, looking tan and fit.
All of it curated, all of it carefully blocked and staged. But to sustain that avatar, to keep the biological machine running, even on fumes, he needed fuel.
Yeah.
And this is where we get into the pharmacological engineering of the presidency.
It was a full-time chemical project?
We are not talking about taking an aspirin a day here. Dallek catalogs a daily regimen. That is, to be blunt, terrifying. He was taking 10 to 12 different medications daily, just to function.
It was a chemical cocktail designed for one purpose: performance. You had the corticosteroids for the Addisons, as you said. You had antispasmodics for the colitis, powerful antibiotics for the constant infections.
Then you have paregoric, which is basically a tincture of opium for the diarrhea, and testosterone.
Which is a detail that people often misunderstand.
They do. They hear testosterone and they think, oh, it was for libido or machismo. It wasn't. It was to keep his weight up. The colitis was stripping the meat off his bones, making him look gaunt and sick. So they pumped him with testosterone to bulk him up, to add muscle mass, to make him look like a powerful leader.
It was part of the costume.
Exactly. Then you add salt tablets to manage the Addisons, antihistamines for allergies, and powerful tranquilizers to help him sleep, because the side effect of all those steroids was that they made him manic and jittery. It was this constant precarious balancing act of uppers, downers, and stabilizers.
And then when the pain cut through all of that, or when the sheer energy flagged because his body was just, shutting down, he turned to the heavy artillery.
Enter Dr. Max Jacobson.
Dr. Feelgood.
This is a character straight out of a noir novel. I mean, a fringe physician in New York who treated a whole roster of celebrities, Marilyn Monroe, Eddie Fisher, Truman Capote, with these supposed miracle shots.
The contents of which were a complete mystery. He claimed it was vitamins and enzymes.
But it wasn't. Dallek confirms through later testing of the vials that it was a high-octane and highly dangerous blend of amphetamines, steroids, animal hormones, and, of all things, animal placenta.
Sheep placenta, specifically.
Right, liquefied sheep placenta and speed.
Right.
That's what was being injected directly into the President of the United States. And JFK became dependent on these shots for major events.
Before the pivotal debates with Nixon in 1960, before summits with foreign leaders, before major speeches.
He needed that chemical override to project the avatar. He needed the pupils dilated, the energy surging, the chronic pain numbed into submission. And the truly terrifying part is that his actual medical team, the official White House doctors, the legitimate physicians, were absolutely horrified.
He warned him constantly.
They told him, Mr. President, we have no idea what is in this stuff. It could be dangerous. It could be interacting with your other 12 medications. It could cloud your judgment at a critical moment.
And Kennedy's response to that is one of the most revealing quotes in the entire book.
It is. He famously just waved them off and said, I don't care if it's horse piss, it works.
It works. That phrase, it just speaks to the sheer desperation of his situation. He wasn't looking for a cure. He was looking for performance. He just needed to function.
But this raises a massive ethical challenge right out of the gate. I mean, we have to pause here.
You have to. You're describing a man with his finger on the nuclear button who is at times heavily medicated, potentially taking amphetamines from a quack doctor, and actively hiding a life-threatening illness from the electorate.
It sounds like fraud.
It does. It sounds exactly like a massive coordinated lie to the American voter. If you went to the polls in 1960 and you knew the candidate had adrenal failure, crumbling bones, and a dependency on sheep placenta and speed, do you vote for that person?
Probably not.
Is this simply a deception? Is it a betrayal of the public trust on the most fundamental level?
That is the attack window. And it's a completely valid one. If this were happening today, it would be the scandal of the century. There's no question. But let me play the mortality strategist for a moment and offer the defense that Dallek and certainly the Kennedy inner circle would posit. It all comes down to deterrence theory. You have to remember the geopolitical context. This isn't peacetime. This is the absolute height of the Cold War.
Where perception is reality, where the other side is constantly probing for weakness.
Exactly. Physical vitality wasn't just about vanity or winning elections. It was a proxy for national strength. The logic, however flawed it might seem to us now, was that if the American president looked weak or frail or dying, the Soviet Union would see an opening.
They would see a nation led by a cripple, and they would calculate that they could push harder. In Berlin, in Southeast Asia, anywhere.
And they would likely be right. So the argument is that the Avatar was actually a geopolitical necessity,
A weapon system.
a weapon system. Precisely. Joseph Kennedy, the patriarch of the family, understood this better than anyone. He drilled it into his sons from boyhood. It's not what you are that matters, it's what people think you are. They genuinely believed that to deter Soviet aggression, the president had to project an image of a Superman. The deception wasn't about vanity, it was part of the national defense.
So the defense is, I had to lie to you to save you.
That's the essence of it. If the Soviets knew the truth, if Khrushchev knew that Kennedy's body was failing, they might have gambled, they might have struck. The lie kept the peace.
So that's the strategic defense anyway. But Dallek's narrative shows that this strategy of the Avatar didn't just have, these ethical costs we've been talking about. It had real, tangible, operational consequences.
It did. It created a dangerous gap between the projected image and the biological reality.
And information asymmetry.
Yes, a perception gap. And this is the second phase of our deep dive. Because the problem with creating a Superman avatar is that eventually you have to walk into a room with a guy like Nikita Khrushchev. And Khrushchev wasn't reading the glowing magazine profiles. He was looking at the man across the table.
Which brings us directly to the Vienna Summit in June of 1961. This is the pivotal moment where the biohack, as you call it, completely and utterly fails.
It is an unmitigated disaster. And to understand why, you have to look at the biological context of that meeting. Dallek details how JFK went into that summit in absolutely terrible shape.
His back was in acute spasm. He was in agony.
So much so that he was soaking in hot baths constantly in the embassy just to be able to stand up straight for the meetings. He was, by all accounts, heavily medicated. That almost certainly included Jacobson's amphetamine shots just to get him through the sessions with Khrushchev.
And Khrushchev is a street fighter. He's a peasant who survived Stalin's purges. He operates on instinct and brute force, not Ivy League debate rules.
Exactly. So Khrushchev sits down across from Kennedy, and he looks past the avatar. He looks past the tan and the perfect hair and the tailored suit, and he sees a man who is stiff, who is clearly in pain, a man who is relying on some kind of chemical crutch to maintain his composure.
And he smells blood in the water.
He does. Khrushchev later described Kennedy in his memoirs with a phrase that is just chilling. He said Kennedy was too intelligent and too weak.
Too weak? For a Cold War adversary to make that assessment of the American president, that is a catastrophic failure of deterrence.
It was the ultimate signal failure. The entire Avatar strategy was designed to signal resolve and invincibility. Instead, because of the drugs and the pain and the effort of hiding it all, Kennedy signaled vulnerability. He signaled that he could be bullied. Khrushchev left Vienna absolutely convinced that he could roll over this rich boy.
So the skepticism here seems more than warranted. The strategy, in its first major test, backfired spectacularly. The mask slipped. The elaborate deception didn't deter the enemy at all. It emboldened him.
It emboldened him to a terrifying degree. And this is where we get to the next part of the chain, the escalation of incentives. You can draw a direct, unbroken line, as Dallek does, from that failure at the Vienna Summit straight to the brink of nuclear apocalypse.
Because if Khrushchev leaves Vienna thinking the American president is weak, well, the perceived cost of Soviet aggression goes way down.
It plummets. Look at the timeline. It's undeniable. Vienna happens in June of 1961. What happens almost immediately after? The pressure ramps up everywhere. The Berlin Wall goes up in August.
Just 2 months later.
2 months. That was the first test of Khrushchev's new theory. He basically said, I'm going to violate the post-war status of Berlin, and this weak young man won't have the guts to stop me. And he was right. Kennedy complained. He made speeches. He maneuvered diplomatically, but he didn't stop the wall from going up.
Which, in Khrushchev's mind, just confirms his hypothesis from Vienna.
It's a massive confirmation bias. That confirmation bias leads directly, inexorably, to Cuba. Why did Khrushchev believe he could secretly install nuclear missiles 90 miles from the coast of Florida? It wasn't just a strategic gamble.
It was a personality assessment.
He viewed Kennedy as a lightweight, a rich boy, as he called him. He thought, I can put these missiles right under his nose, and by the time he figures it out, he'll be too scared, too weak, too medicated to do anything meaningful about it. He expected another weak response, just like with the Berlin Wall.
The paradox here is just staggering when you lay it out like that. The biohack, the entire elaborate, painful, drug-fueled effort to project strength, is the very thing that precipitated the crisis.
It actually signaled vulnerability and invited aggression.
If Kennedy had been genuinely healthy, or maybe even if he hadn't tried so hard to mask the weakness, the dynamic might have been entirely different. But the specific combination of hidden weakness and artificially projected strength created this vacuum that Khrushchev just rushed to fill.
It signaled opportunity. And that brings us to the brink. October 1962. The U-2 spy planes discover the missile sites. The world is standing on the edge of a cliff. And this is where Dallek's entire thesis pivots. This is the epistemic advantage.
This is the moment where the story shifts from the president is a fraud who got us into this mess to the president is the only one who can save us.
It's the paradox of mortality. The moment the crisis began, the very thing that had been his greatest liability, Kennedy's physical suffering, his intimacy with death, it transformed into his greatest strategic asset.
How so? Explain that transformation.
Dallek describes the meetings of the Executive Committee, or ExComm. And in that room, you essentially have a Cartesian split, a split between mind and body. On one side of the room, you have the healthy bodies.
The Joint Chiefs of Staff. Men like Air Force General Curtis LeMay. Big, strong, confident men.
Exactly. Men who radiated health and vigor. Men who have likely never spent a day in a hospital bed wondering if they would see the morning. And how did they view the crisis? Dallek shows they viewed it through the lens of abstract game theory.
It was a math problem for them.
A math problem. They talked about megatons. They talked about surgical airstrikes. They made historical comparisons to Munich in 1938, arguing against appeasement. It was a purely intellectual exercise in the application of power.
And on the other side of that room, you have the dying body.
You have John F. Kennedy, a man living in constant grinding physical pain. A man who, as Dallek reminds us, had received the last rites of the Catholic Church not once, but at least 3 or 4 times in his life before even becoming president. He had looked death in the face repeatedly.
So for him, it wasn't an abstraction.
Not at all. He didn't see megatons. He saw burning flesh. His own suffering gave him a visceral, concrete understanding of what those abstract terms actually meant.
Dallek argues that this physical suffering gave him a very specific cognitive tool. He calls it a form of epistemic humility.
That is the key term, epistemic humility. Think about Kennedy's lifelong relationship with experts. For his entire life, the best doctors in the world had treated him. And what was the result?
They had botched his back surgeries, leaving him in more pain.
They had misdiagnosed his stomach issues for years. They had pumped him full of steroids that were literally dissolving his bones. He had learned, through the painful medium of his own body, a fundamental lesson. Experts are often wrong.
And confidence does not equal competence.
Exactly. So now, fast forward to the cabinet room in October 1962. General LeMay looks the president in the eye and guarantees with absolute certainty that a surgical airstrike will wipe out all the missiles and that the Soviets won't dare to respond.
A healthy president might have been persuaded by that kind of military confidence.
A healthy president, a man who trusted the hierarchy, who trusted the vitality and competence of the system, might very well have said, "Okay, General, you're the expert, launch the strike." But Kennedy is uniquely immune to that confidence.
Because he's been let down by that kind of certainty his whole life.
He doesn't buy it. He knows in his bones that surgical is a lie. He knows that things break. He knows that bodies break. He knows that plans go wrong. His entire life was a testament to plans going wrong.
And if he had given that order to strike?
World War III. It's not an exaggeration. We know now from Soviet archives that the local commanders in Cuba had tactical nuclear weapons and the authority to use them against an American invasion force. An airstrike or an invasion would have almost certainly triggered a nuclear exchange.
The ExComm takes, which Dallek cites extensively, really bear this out, don't they? You can hear the dynamic in the room.
You can. You hear these aggressive, confident, healthy advisors pushing and pushing for escalation.
Yeah.
And then you have Kennedy's voice, the sick man. He's the one constantly pushing for restraint. He's the one asking the questions nobody else is asking.
Like what?
Like, what about the Russians? How do we give them a way out of this without humiliation? How do we help Khrushchev save face so he doesn't feel forced to retaliate? He's thinking about the psychology of his adversary, not just the military calculus.
It's the mortality filter in action.
It is. He was looking for the off-ramp because he, more than anyone else in that room, understood the finality of the crash. And because of that, he was willing to do things the strong men in the room considered weak.
Like making a compromise?
Like secretly trading the obsolete Jupiter missiles in Turkey to give Khrushchev the political cover he needed to back down. To a guy like General LeMay, that kind of trade was appeasement. It was weakness. To Kennedy, it was survival.
But let's play the skeptic one more time here.
Oh,
The
yeah.
Democratic challenge is still hanging in the air.
It is.
Are we really arguing that a sick president is safer than a healthy one? That just feels so counterintuitive. If the voters had known the full extent of the illness, the Addisons, the back, the amphetamines, they would have chosen a healthy man. They would have chosen Nixon.
Without a doubt.
So are we justifying a fundamental subversion of democracy simply because, in this one instance, it happened to work out?
That is the big, uncomfortable question at the heart of Dallek's book. And the defense he presents is what you might call the controlled opacity defense. It's fundamentally a counterfactual argument.
Okay, what's the counterfactual?
Suppose Nixon had won in 1960. Or suppose Lyndon Johnson, who was healthy and brimming with can-do confidence, was in the chair in 1962. Or even suppose Kennedy himself had been healthy and confident. Dallek argues that a healthy man, trusting the military consensus, would have invaded Cuba.
Because a healthy man wouldn't have had that epistemic humility born of suffering. He would have trusted the confident experts.
And he would have plunged the world into nuclear war. So the grim paradox is that the deception, the lie of his health, allowed him to be in the room. But the deep, painful truth of his illness is what saved the room.
It's just an incredible idea. Controlled opacity. He had to be opaque to the public to get the power.
But he used the private reality of his own suffering to wield that power correctly. Only a man so intimate with his own fragility could fully comprehend the fragility of the world. His pain, Dallek suggests, literally slowed down his decision-making. It forced him to deliberate, to doubt, to question the easy, surgical solutions offered by men who had never known his kind of breakage.
It's a fascinating inversion of how we think about these things. We usually think of pain as a distraction, something that clouds judgment and makes you rash.
Right.
But Dallek is suggesting that for Kennedy, in this one specific high-stakes moment, pain was a clarifying agent. It stripped away all the abstractions of war and power politics and left only the raw reality of suffering.
Which brings us to the transferable lesson of this whole deep dive. We have to fundamentally rethink what we mean by judgment under mortality. We as a society place such a high premium on vitality in our leaders.
We still do. We want them to jog up the stairs of Air Force One. We want them to look vibrant and energetic.
But Dallek's work forces us to ask, in the nuclear age, could that vitality actually be a liability?
A healthy body can breed an arrogant mind.
It might. Vitality can breed a sense of invulnerability. If you have never felt your own body profoundly fail you, you might dangerously overestimate your ability to control a crisis. You might believe your own press about being invincible.
So Dallek's ultimate point is that we don't need strong leaders who think they can't be broken.
We need leaders who understand breakage. We need leaders who know in their very bones what it feels like to be powerless, because that fear, that profound respect for destruction, is perhaps the only thing that reliably keeps the finger off the button.
It completely redefines what strength in a leader is. Strength isn't the absence of pain or vulnerability.
It's the cognitive lens provided by it.
Kennedy's life was, as the title says, unfinished. That's the undeniable tragedy of it. He died in that brutal public way. But Dallek's book suggests that his life was sustained by sheer will for just long enough.
It was a tragedy of physical suffering, absolutely. But that suffering was the very mechanism of his greatest strategic restraint.
The irony is just. It's grimly perfect. The deception was necessary to get him into power. But his hidden weakness was the specific, unique tool required to manage the crisis that the deception itself helped to precipitate.
It's a perfect tragic circle. An unfinished life, sustained by amphetamines and steroids and sheer force of will, where physical fragility sharpened the mind against the collective madness of total war.
It really leaves you wondering about the criteria we use, even now, to select our leaders.
It certainly does. And that's the provocative thought I want to leave you, our listener, with today. If we demand perfect health from our leaders, if we scrutinize every medical record and demand a flawless image of vitality, are we inadvertently selecting for people who lack the necessary visceral fear of destruction?
Are we filtering out the very mortality filter that might one day save us all?
It's a question worth asking. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Robert Dallek's An Unfinished Life. This has been Nonfiction Insights. If you want more deep dives like this, please subscribe.
Thanks for listening.